Are you looking for a mission-driven school that aims to educate leaders for business and society? Would you like to know how to get into that school, the Yale School of Management? Tune in for this interview with its Assistant Dean for Admissions, Bruce DelMonico.
Welcome to Admission Straight Talk, the podcast dedicated to graduate admissions and helping you approach the application process thoughtfully and successfully. Your host is Accepted's founder and world-renowned admissions guru, Linda Abraham. At Accepted, our mission is to get you to that unforgettable moment when you read your acceptance email and shout, "Yes, I'm in!" Confident you'll be attending the perfect program to help you launch the career of your dreams.
Welcome to the 442nd episode of Admission Straight Talk. Thanks for listening. Are you preparing to apply to your dream business schools? Are you competitive at your target programs? Accepted's MBA admissions calculator can give you a quick reality check. Just go to accepted.com/MBA quiz, complete the quiz, and you'll not only get an assessment, but tips on how to actually improve your qualifications and your chances of acceptance. Plus, it's all free. Again, use the calculator at accepted.com/MBA quiz to obtain your free assessment. It gives me great pleasure to have back on Admission Straight Talk and introduce Bruce DelMonico, Assistant Dean of Admissions at the Yale School of Management. He has been on the admissions team at Yale since 2004, became the director in 2006, and the Assistant Dean in 2012. He was last on Admission Straight Talk almost exactly 2 years ago in October 2019. Seems like a lifetime ago because that was, of course, before COVID. Bruce, welcome to Admission Straight Talk. It's a pleasure to have you back on the show. So much has changed in the last 2 years.
It has, Linda. Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure. It does feel like a much longer than 2 years since we last had this conversation.
Right. Well, we're going to do some review from the last conversation. So for those, most of it's going to be new. So I would actually recommend that all listeners also listen to your previous interview, which is at accepted.com/338, accepted.com/338. But let's start right now. This is the part that's going to be duplicative. And that is, can you please provide a basic overview of the Yale SOM MBA program for listeners who may not be that familiar with it, focusing on its more distinctive elements?
Sure, happy to do so. Yeah, so here at Yale, we have a full-time 2-year MBA, which hopefully the listeners are familiar with the general structure of the MBA program or an MBA program. I think some of the things that make our program distinctive are the fact that we are very sort of mission oriented. Our founding mission is to educate leaders for business and society. It's a very broad, very multi-sector mission. I think that definitely does animate and influence just about everything that happens here at the School of Management. So for students who are here, for those of your listeners who come here to Yale, that means a few things. It means that you will have the first year of your experience, the core curriculum consists of our integrated curriculum, which is different than you would experience at other business schools. And I think that's one distinctive aspect. And we can go more into that, but I won't bore you with all the details now. But it's a very integrated, as the name implies, a multidisciplinary approach, really trying to get our students to think very broadly, across disciplines, across functions. We also are case-based, but we have our own case writing team. So we use raw cases, as we call them. That's another distinct feature. And I think, although it's become more common, we do have a very global orientation and so a menu of global opportunities that exist here. And that's actually a required part of your experience here at Yale. And I think that was something, that again has become more common, but I think we were the first school to really make that a required part of the experience. And so I think those are just a few
the global
things
network. Yeah.
Exactly.
We'll touch on we'll get to the global a little bit later, but Can you go back? What's the difference between a raw case and a more traditional case?
Yeah, a cooked case, as we call them, a traditional case. So that is, so
raw cooked. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so we try. And so the idea behind it, the names try to give a little bit of a sense of a little flavor for what the cases are about. So a traditional case, or cooked case as we call them, involves the case writing team, so doing the research, gathering all the materials, and then kind of distilling it all down, boiling it all down into a 10 to 12 page document that kind of leads the reader to a single point, or kind of like that thrust of the case. And it's kind of very linear and makes kind of one kind of culminating point. And the idea is that all the things that are irrelevant or extraneous are kind of weeded out, and the student doesn't really need to worry about that. So the insight that the faculty had here at Yale is that that's really not how you experience information in the real world. And when you are in all the listeners here who are in jobs and at work and having to finding solutions to problems, they're not given a 10-page document and said, okay, here's all that you need to know, go figure out the answer. Much of what you have to do is find out what's relevant, figure out what facts you need to know and try to fill in gaps if they're missing, or try to reconcile inconsistent pieces of information. And so that's how our cases are constructed. And actually, we have our case writing team came from other schools that have case writing teams. And what they do is they do all the research they would do at other schools, but then they give all that research to the students. And so you get, as a student, you will get all that raw material, all the real world material that you would get, in your professional life. So you get earnings statements, you get, securities filings, you give sort of quarterly reports, your 10Ks, 10Qs, you get media coverage, you get interviews with key stakeholders, all the things that you would experience as a professional. And the idea is that skill is as important, if not more important, as figuring out the solution, because how you frame a solution, we actually have had a course called problem framing. How you frame the solution, how you set it up, really dictates what the outcome is. And so we're trying to teach our students, even in the classroom, we're trying to give our students those real world skills of learning how to sift through information, learning how to make sense of information, because that's such a critical skill that you need to learn. And so that's how our cases are constructed. That's why we call them raw versus cooked, or, Yale versus traditional.
Yeah, well, I'm just thinking about we're all bombarded with information, and sifting through it and choosing what to pay attention to is an invaluable skill.
Yeah.
It's an increasingly important one.
Yeah, no, we very much believe that's the case.
Right. Now, the class profile for Yale SOM for the entering class of 2023 had some pretty impressive stats. 730, and you're smiling, 730 median GMAT, increased diversity across the board. To what do you attribute these developments? Because some might think that they're somewhat contradictory.
Well, I would start by saying I don't know that our numbers are it's not as though dramatically different than they have in the past. So I think our median GMAT, you're right, is 730. And I think in the last few years it has, but I think the year before maybe have dipped just slightly into 720, but it's typically the median 730. And the average GRE, I think was 165, 165.
Right.
And GPA in the 3.6. And, the diversity numbers have been, I think they're pretty consistent with where they have been in the past, to the extent they are, increasing on all those dimensions. They are up a little bit. I think that's right. Not dramatically, but definitely up a little bit. I think it's a factor of a few things. I mean, I think it's partly attributable, and I don't know what other admissions professionals are saying, but I think the year was a very competitive year, and we had one of the top 3 application years in terms of application volume, and I think that played a factor. We are trying to really focus on having a well-represented class across all dimensions, and so I think that it's reflected in some of the numbers, and not just in terms of the you mentioned some of the diversity numbers, underrepresented students of color, but in terms of citizenship, and in terms of gender, and in terms
Right.
of professional background. So we really are, we've always focused on this, but we really wanting to make sure that we're paying particular attention. I think that's hopefully reflected in the numbers.
All right. I mean, in terms of the GMAT score,
Mhm.
certainly over time, there has been a tremendous increase in GMAT score. I don't just
Yeah.
mean the last 2 or 3 years,
Yeah.
not just for Yale, but in general terms. I can easily remember, 20 years ago that a 700 was a great score.
I think that, yeah, I remember that too.
I'm sure when you started at Yale SOM, it was a really, really good score.
Yeah.
And now it's like, well, it's okay.
Yeah.
Nothing special. So I don't know. I don't know if the students have gotten smarter, if the prep has gotten better, the test has gotten easier.
Yeah, I think there are a number of factors. I don't know. I mean, I think there are a number of factors at play. I don't think the test, we talked to GMAC, the test really hasn't changed. I think the preparation has gotten better. I think, and there are other things in terms of the score reporting and cancellation
That's true.
policies that I think people can cancel whatever they want, and so they're only really getting their high. They can keep taking until they get that score that they want, and then we don't see any of the other scores. So I think that's pushing things up a little bit.
Right.
I mean, we this might be a little bit of a tangent, but it's been quieter more recently. But there was a period of time where a number of us were pushing quite strongly for GMAT to rescale the GMAT because it had the score inflation had gotten really out of control. And I think there is actually, quite frankly, a good bit of score compression, especially on the quant side, that makes it very difficult for us to really get the kind of range, the kind of variance we need to be able to distinguish candidates in a useful way. So that is an area where I think it would be frankly helpful for some rescaling and some, to decompress some of the scores that would help us in our jobs, and I think would be more meaningful. So, but that's could be a whole other conversation. But I think there are a number of factors at play, and there's some of both the preparation and the reporting policies I think are factoring into it.
All right. Now we've touched on the fact that, last time we spoke, COVID was not in our vocabulary for all intents and purposes. Maybe there were some reports already about something in China, but Wuhan, but nothing every day, to be sure. So I'm sure there were tons of COVID adaptations at Yale. Which ones is Yale planning to keep? What has been the silver lining in this situation?
Yeah, I think that it is funny to think back, and funny is not necessarily the right word. Actually, I was in China with a colleague in November of 2019, and it was just a couple of weeks after we got back that we started to hear. I mean, actually, while we were on the trip, people were starting to hear, I think. So it's to think from then to here, when all the things that have happened, all the changes. And we have, as with other schools, we've had to adapt really. I mean, Yale, we consider ourselves a residential program. Being sort of here on campus is an important part of the experience. And so this past year plus have been very difficult for students, for faculty, for really everybody. And I think that's the case across the board. We're back on campus. I'm on campus now. My office just returned. Students have been on campus all semester, and we've, knock on wood, Yale has very low instance rates and it's doing well, and did have to pivot and make some major changes over the last year and a half. It will be interesting to see what, to your question, it will be interesting to see what sticks. The faculty, has developed some expertise now with online courses, and there's talk about having some of those extend beyond the pandemic, and thinking about different modes of delivery. We continue to, even though students are fully in class now, we're obviously sort of still, for example, recording classes and having hybrid option for students who are either, are feeling under the weather or who are, can't make it to class for various reasons. So I think those things might endure. I think more broadly, this predates the pandemic, but the faculty is actually currently undertaking a curriculum review. And it will be, so again, this was conceived of and planned independent and prior to the pandemic, but I'm sure that will inform some of the things that come out of it, beyond the different modes of delivery, the online coursework. I think there could be some even greater experimentation that comes out of it that is maybe inspired by this last year and a half.
Yeah, I would assume that, one of the things that we heard from many of your colleagues is that the ability to have visiting speakers has been enhanced, because they don't have to physically show up. Yeah, they can virtually show up and talk to students like you and I are speaking right now. I'm in Los Angeles, you're in New Haven. Yeah. So,
and we definitely had that. I mean, I think in particular, Jeff Sonnenfeld, who's one of our, prominent faculty members, he had a course that's basically leadership across sectors. And it basically was a class that, every class would have basically two CEOs or two heads of organizations come and talk to the class. And it was kind of, it's laptops closed, so books down. It was very kind of confidential conversation with these sort of luminaries of the sort of business and nonprofit and public sectors. Oftentimes they would be here in person in New Haven, but sometimes they would be beamed in, and that happened pre-pandemic, and so we would that kind of thing already happened to some degree. I'm sure that happened elsewhere too, but I think the difference is the degree of acceptance and the feeling that this is not unusual, I think, has only heightened the opportunities that exist. I think that's right. And I think that does open the door to more of these kinds of sort of guest speakers, as you say. And I mean, not to turn it on admissions, but I think we've also
Right.
We've seen it that last past year and a half, it's been entirely virtual, and we're still virtual in terms of our recruiting. And even when travel resumes, we will still, I think, be heavily virtual in terms of how we do things. I don't know what the ultimate balance will be, but it's been wonderful to really speak to and connect with people who otherwise wouldn't have been able to get to, an event in Beijing or Mumbai or London or wherever we were, and
Or
now.
Timbuktu, where they really don't have it.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really opened up a lot of doors, I think, for candidates too. So anyway, I think that's a bit of an aside, but I think that is one of the changes that I'm sure will endure.
Do you think admissions will, in terms of recruiting, and actually in terms of job recruiting also, will become kind of a hybrid balance where you have some events, but also offer online events?
I think so. I certainly hope so. I think it's been a healthier balance. I think for the admissions and all, as you say, for career recruiting, this year is continuing to be virtual for us, and that was what the recruiters wanted.
Right.
They thought that worked well, and that was beneficial to them. And so, and I think it hopefully will continue to open up access and sort of level the playing field in lots of ways on both the incoming student side and the career side. The tough thing is, it's a little bit of a collective action issue. We intend to do and we're hoping to do, but then if to the extent another school says, well, we need to really be in person and to be effective, and then everyone else says, well, okay, if they're in person, we're going to be in person too. So it can be a little bit of a race to the bottom. I'm hoping that we settle on a healthy balance between in person and virtual going forward.
Okay, that's good. And last kind of general question about Yale before we dive into admissions.
Yeah.
Now, and you touched on it, Yale has its global studies requirement.
Right.
In the past, it gave also students lots of opportunity for global study. It also participated in and co-founded the Global Studies Network, which allowed for online classes globally, right?
Yeah.
And I'm guessing that COVID put a damper on some of the physical travel. Perhaps it made more important the Global Studies Network or more valuable. But kind of where is Yale at now, or hopes to be even in the upcoming year?
Yeah, so that's exactly right. That obviously the travel didn't happen. Actually, we have one of the global studies requirements and one of the global studies opportunities are these global network weeks, which happen through the Global Network for Advanced Management, the network of 30 schools that you mentioned. Our pivot, in March of 2020 to going hybrid happened. We're really within hours of people getting on planes to do these global studies trips. So it was very sort of very close to that the timing was very, very close. And so since then, all these opportunities have happened virtually. And we've been able to do that. Some of them were already virtual. So what we affectionately call, Ted Snyder term this SNOCs. He loves that term, with small network online courses. Those always existed. Those were semester-long courses that were virtual through the global network, and that you would be taking, as a Yale student, you'd be taking courses with students from the other global network schools. Those have continued throughout, and they've expanded because those have been, filling the void that some of the other opportunities have left. And there have been these global network weeks that have happened virtually in the last year and a half. So those have been, instead of traveling to Koç University in Turkey, or any number I'm trying to think of, so FGV in Brazil, these opportunities were happening virtually instead, and that will continue this fall. And then I think in March the plan is to start to resume travel. I don't know if it will be fully resuming or a kind of a hybrid or mixed. So in person and virtual. My understanding is there are intentions to resume some of the trips then. And then for our current students who were affected by this disruption, the lack of opportunity to travel, the school has invited them, to the extent they can, to participate in future trips as alumni, because it's a really highly rated and really kind of I think a special part of the experience that people really do regard well and would like to participate in, to the extent that the students haven't had a chance to do that. We'd like to make them whole on that opportunity.
That's great. Okay, good. Is there anything that you'd like people to know about Yale SOM, a common misconception, or alternatively a common misconception that you'd like to dispel?
Sure. I think there probably, I'm sure there are more than one, but I think the one that I hear, I don't know most frequently, but I still hear frequently, and again, I've been to your point, I started in the office in 2004. I think it's almost exactly to the day I think the 17th sort of anniversary
Congratulations.
of my start in October of 2004. And I think, we've done, as a school, I think we've come a long way, and I think we've done a lot to dispel one myth, which is that we're the nonprofit school. It's always difficult to dispel that, because I don't think it's wrong that we are incredibly strong in the nonprofit space, and we have lots of students. About a quarter of our class comes from the nonprofit and public sectors, and we have lots of students who then go back into those sectors, or who came from the private sector and go into the nonprofit or public sector. So we're very proud of that. So I don't want to say that we're not. I would say that we're not just the nonprofit school. I make it an ampersand. We are very big on the ampersand here, the business and society. And I think we are, all the sectors. It's not about one versus the other. But we have lots of graduates who, I like to think of the SOM story, who have success in careers that kind of span the sectors, and will do well and understand the interconnection and intersection of the sectors. So I think that's a kind of myth that I think still lingers, even though I think people know more about the school now than they did when I started, and I know better that we really consider ourselves to be a general management school, and we look to prepare our graduates to be successful in every sector, every industry, regardless of what they want to do. I guess in sort of an ancillary myth that I also hear a good bit of is that we're not a finance school, and I think, frankly, when you look at SOM and you consider sort of the people who have been and who are currently here, and I think about so Andrew Metrick and Gary Gordon from Wharton, and I work with Toby Moskowitz and others who came from Chicago, and just all the luminaries who are here. I think that's Anjani Jain, who runs the MBA program, says very consistently that we're more broadly easily a top 5 finance school. I think that's right, probably higher than that, but certainly no as good as any school in finance.
And you said, a good percentage of your grads go into Wall Street, right?
That's right.
I don't remember the percentage off the top of my head, but I know the consulting and finance are major industries. That
really is, and it has been the last couple of years. It feels like that's been even more. It's sort of consolidated around those industries a little bit. So it's about a third of our students go into consulting, and about 20-25% go into finance generally, and it tends to be mostly investment banking. It can be also sort of PE, VC, investment management, and then sometimes diversified financial services. So
well, that's pretty strong evidence that you're not just a not-for-profit school.
Yeah.
Okay, let's turn to the application. Yale SOM requires the Gmat and the GRE. Obviously, there's been enormous change in that field in the last 2 years. Any plans to either expand the number of tests that you accept, or issue test waivers, or go test optional?
We don't. That's a great question, and we have seen other schools who are making moves in these directions, and we have not done that, and we don't have plans to do that right now. I think, I don't know, I can't remember if we talked about this 2 years ago. We're always looking at experimenting with different ways to evaluate candidates, and trying to broaden the base, and kind of look at different instruments to evaluate different competencies, and really GMAT and the GRE are predictive of performance, midpoint performance here in the program, but that's obviously a short-term metric, and they're very blend instruments. There's sometimes people who score well who don't do well here, and some people who score modestly who do well. And so we've looked for years, been trying to find ways to gauge, or do a better job of gauging sort of secondary and tertiary, or finding secondary and tertiary indicators that will predict performance here, and then obviously looking at performance beyond school as well. So we have other things. We have a behavioral assessment that we've had in place for a number of years. We use our video questions. We have other instruments that we're using that are trying to gauge things other than tests, and looking at things other than non-cognitive traits. So we'll continue to do that, and we look at those right now are supplementing they're additive. We're looking at ways we can make them substitutes for, and we're still investing in that. I personally don't feel comfortable, because grades and scores, and I would say actually sort of grades are frankly more predictive than scores as between the two, but to the extent that those are doing work and adding value in the evaluative process, I'm reluctant to take those away without having confidence that there's no loss of fidelity in our evaluations. And I don't know if other schools feel like they've kind of cracked the code. I feel like we don't feel comfortable just taking them away without having anything else in their stead. So we're continuing to look. We were careful. We did monitor during the pandemic test taking behaviors and test taking availability to make sure that people were not. And that's why we, for example, not this past cycle, the cycle before, we added around, we extended the test taking deadline. Everyone did that because test centers were closing, and people, and before the online options came around, there was concern about what people would be able to do. So we wanted to make sure there was no gap and people were able to take tests. But the value of the test, there are two, I'm kind of rambling now, there are two interrelated issues. There's test access, and there's sort of the predictive nature, and there are issues of fairness and equity that go into the test. And so we have to balance all those things. That's what we're constantly doing. So we don't plan to wholesale, waive tests or go test optional, but we're looking to see if there are ways we can build out, and we've already done that to some degree, to build out an infrastructure that supports the test and kind of gives us greater context, give us a fuller picture of candidates than just those single data points.
Got it. Okay. Now, one thing I will tell about the last interview is we went through, and I think you already had the behavioral assessment 2 years ago. Is that correct?
Yes,
and we talked about the different purposes of each element in the application. I don't want to do that today because we still have it,
So
last time.
Yeah.
exhibit.com/338. But I do want to ask you, when the applicant hits submit, okay, they've got it all in. What happens?
Yeah.
How is an application processed? Who looks at it? What do you personally look at first or second or whatever?
But personally, I think it's interesting. Everyone has their own thing that they go to first. I personally am often the elements are presented in a certain order, and you could just go straight through. And a lot of times that's the way people go through them. I sometimes will jump to the resume first because that's like a snapshot. And I think that's to the extent this obviously this conversation is about application tips, but to the extent people, I think there's an aspect of people's candidacies that they maybe spend less time on there. I think the resume is kind of often underappreciated and underused element, because that's really like just in one page where you give us a snapshot of you as a candidate, your academic, your professional background, your interests, and I think that's often gives a good sense of someone. But after you click submit, one thing I would say is we actually wait until after the deadline before we start our review process. So there's no benefit to submitting a month early. Obviously, you don't want to wait till the very last second, but because that can be stressful for you.
Maybe the day before.
Maybe the day before. The day before is always a good idea. But we will wait till after the deadline until we have all the applications. We sort of clean them up, make sure all the materials are in, and the recommendations and other aspects of the application are in. And then we tend to do a quick just overview of the whole pool. We do a kind of quick triage is what we call it, just to see what the pool looks like, just the overall sort of profile of the round. And then we will start to kind of go right into reading. We'll send out some interview invitations, and we'll just kind of start digging into it. And we make sure every application has sort of two independent views. So two different people are looking at it. And the majority of applications comes to committee multiple times. We have an interview committee. It's a subset of the overall admissions committee that makes decisions on whether to invite people to interview. And then once people have been invited to interview, and we interview about, I would say, it depends year to year, it depends, but I would say maybe a quarter to a third of candidates, and it depends by round, but get an interview invitation. And then people at the end of the round will come to decision committee, and that's the full committee everybody, it's about 12 to 15 people, who are in the admissions committee, making decisions on the candidates. That's sort of post-interview people who will come for an ultimate decision. And to your point, everyone I think probably looks at things differently. I think consistently we look at the video questions, for example, last. I think because that's and we have to be careful about that, because that's where we're actually seeing the candidate, and don't want that to sort of unduly influence or skew our perception of the candidate. So we want to kind of, and we've talked about ways we can even suppress. There is some information we suppress so that we are not biased by that or skewed by that. But we talk about ways we can even suppress more to make it less sort of identifying, so that we're not, not imposing or bringing our any biases to the process, or trying to minimize that through the process.
Sure. Now you said that, you do this first, you do this overall scan, if you will, of the applicant pool. Are you looking, like, do you have a screen based on GMAT or GPA or GRE scores? Are you looking for how many people are from specific industries or locations? It's not so much. It's not reduced. We don't reduce any single sort of data point or set of data points. We actually get not surprisingly, we get kind of like a dashboard, a snapshot. So it's just a quick look to see, that it summarizes all key information in terms of sort of grades and scores and work experience and recommendations, and all those data points, just to get a sense. We're not really, we don't put our thumb on the scale in terms of things like demographics. That's something we will. Obviously we will run the numbers to see what they look like, just to get a sense of what the pool looks like, but it doesn't inform in a major way what the decisions look like going forward. One of the more common questions I get is something like, I'm an Indian male engineer, but I grew up in the United States. Will I be considered an Indian male engineer, or I'll be considered an American? Which bucket do I belong in? And they're absolutely obsessed with this question. Yeah. And I think there's a sense that there is a single bucket that people fall into, and you have to be kind of one or the other. And there are people, and it's there are a lot. We have lots of candidates who are from India, for example, but studied in the States, or from other parts of the world who studied here, or sometimes U.S. citizens who studied elsewhere, more commonly studying in the States. It's we're not reducing candidates to a kind of a profile in that sort of I guess reductive way. It's not as though you're and I'm trying to think of, like, it's not an either or, that you're either Indian or you studied in the US. You can be an Indian candidate who studied in the US or not. My usual answer is, well, you'll be considered an Indian who studied in the US, Indian male engineer who grew up in the United States, or some such thing. The other thing I tell them is that it's every applicant's job to be, at the end of the day, in a group of one. Okay. Forget the labels, forget the groups. You're an individual, and that's how you have to present yourself. Yeah. But I don't know. They don't listen to me. Well, I think the offshoot, the related question which we get a lot is just the sort of I'm an Indian male engineer, and gosh, how am I going to distinguish, to your point, how am I going to distinguish myself? And I think that's the challenge for everybody, is regardless of what your background is or what your profile is, how do you sort of don't focus on what's most like everybody else, focus on something distinctive. Right. I think that's right. And I think we have a lot of applicants, if we have a lot of applicants who are sort of Indian male engineers, we also take a good number. It's not as though, I think there's a sense that because people have if to the extent people have a background that they feel is well represented, that you will therefore take people who are not from that background. I'm not articulate. It's not that. It's not like you don't take them because they're well represented. The competition is more intense. I think that's true. We take I don't even know, you have to look at what, what the denominator is really relative to what the numerator, like, I don't know if we're overrepresented, underrepresented, but we're taking a good number of students from various backgrounds who are well represented in the pool, because they're well represented in the pool. And that's where we're working with what we have. Right. Okay. Sorry, that was a little bit of a maybe inarticulate digression. No, it was interesting. And this is it's a question that comes up all the time. Now, if somebody is lucky enough to be invited to interview, what can they expect on interview day? I assume it's virtual. It's virtual right now. It will be for this first round. And my expectation is we will be, I'm trying to think, for the rest of the year, we're planning on being virtual, but we'll see what the university guidelines look like in the new year, in 2022. So that part, if we're on campus, and we always do some virtual interviews, even when we're on campus, when people can come to campus, we do have a day set, put together for people on campus, though, to sort of sit on
mock class and have lunch with students and do those things. And we're trying to replicate that as much as possible because I think it is important for them to get a sense of the community and get a sense of what the experience is like and who their peers would be. But the interview, to your question, the interview itself are conducted almost exclusively by trained second-year students. And we just did a training recently. We do that with some of it is done ourselves, but we actually bring in people. We have David Crusoe from the Yale College Dean's Office, who's done this for a number of years and is fantastic. And he's actually an expert on emotional intelligence and actually wrote the Mesquite, which is the Myers-Salve-Crusoe emotional intelligence test he developed with Peter Salve, who's the president of Yale. And so he comes in and helps train our students and does a great job. And we have other training that we go through to make sure that our students are as well calibrated as possible. We're trying to minimize bias, trying to get them. And actually, they're having a follow-up session today to make sure to get feedback on, make sure that they're comfortable with the interview process. But anyway, so it's trained second-year students. They're 30-minute interviews. They've seen your resume. They haven't seen any other part of the application. And we do use a structured interview process. So it's everybody receives the same questions in the same order in the same way. I think that people are sometimes concerned that might feel less personal, but we feel it's really important for the evaluation purposes, for the predictive purposes, for it to be structured. Unstructured interviews really have no predictive value, and to the extent we want this interview to be sort of meaningful part of the evaluation process, having it structured is really the only way to go. And they're pretty straightforward questions. We're not trying to trick you. We're not trying to ask any sort of market sizing or how many quarters are in the Empire State Building or any number of things, or how many sort of golf balls could you fit in a 747. It's really about your graduate management plans, your post-MBA plans, some behavioral questions that I think you should be expecting, those kinds of questions you expect on a job interview. So we're really not trying to trick you. We're really just trying to get a better sense of you, and then obviously give you a chance to ask questions and learn more about us. So it tends to be a two-way conversation in the end, when there's a chance to ask questions.
All right, thank you. Now,
talking about the application?
So that could be, the written application, the behavioral judgment test, or the video, or the interview. What's the most common applicant mistake? What do you see?
Yeah, that's a good question. And there's so many different ways to answer that. And I think you could focus on some of the more technical aspects of, things that people do wrong, or ways that people, the silly mistakes that people make that they're easily kind of proofreading or just simply passing their eyes over would catch. I think higher level piece of feedback I would give that, I give another context too, and I think other people probably do as well. It's kind of the be yourself flavor of advice, but I don't want to make it sound like a sort of platitude, but I think people do, and I guess it kind of touches on some of the other things we're talking about, which in terms of sort of coming from what you feel is an overrepresented potentially demographic in the applicant pool, or applying to a school that you feel has a certain personality. And I think there is a tendency in different ways to try to shade your candidacy either to kind of fit the school, like Yale's a nonprofit school, so I'm going to be a nonprofit candidate, or this other school is the finance school, so I'm going to be a finance candidate there, or an operations or marketing or whatever it is. And also to try to distinguish yourself in maybe some non-organic ways, like to trying to create some point of differentiation. I don't think it's not possible to do that out of thin air, and I think that comes across as a hollow. And so I think it's I think it's important. Yeah, I think it's important not to sort of deviate from who you are, and not try to sort of get it. I mean, you hear this from other schools, I'm sure, not to try and get in our heads and predict what we're looking for or what we're thinking, because we're not at this point. There is no finance school, there's no marketing school, there's no every school, any top school is going to be strong in a number of different areas, and they're not looking for any all one kind of candidate. I think one of the things we talk about quite a bit is the strength and diversity, and how we want to have a very diverse student body across a range of dimensions, and how that informs and influences the classroom experience, how it makes it enriches discussion. It expands perspectives, and it expands your people's minds. You think, you learn and think differently. And if you're in an environment where people have different perspectives and different viewpoints than you do if you're in an organization where everybody already thinks and feels the same way. That doesn't help you kind of grow. So anyway, so that was a little bit of a digression, but I think that's, and there are different ways that can manifest itself in terms of not trying to predict or kind of shape who you are in an artificial way.
I think there's a balance in, obviously, and you wouldn't want to read applications that presented everything about the applicant, right? That's not the idea. The idea is that they present what is most salient, okay? Right. But authentically do so. Otherwise, they do come across as shallow or hollow or just not real.
Right.
So I think there is a legitimacy in them trying to present the part of their background that best answers the questions, because that is right. What you want to know.
Yeah.
But it has to be with authenticity.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. It's actually it's just out of camera here, and I've got this background on. But I have one of the picture I have in my office is a framed New Yorker cartoon where it's parents and a child outside a door that says admissions, and there's a little child there, and the father's speaking to the child, and he says, "Now remember, be the yourself we talked about." And I think that's kind of how a lot of admissions is. I mean, it's a very official process. We get little insights into you and very discrete pieces of you. And so there is opportunity for you to present those pieces that you think make the most sense based on sort of who we are or what part of you you want to present. I think we work very hard at Yale to broaden the base of information we get. So it's even though it's discrete pieces, they're very balanced pieces, and we work very hard in terms of crafting the application and the information we're trying to receive to make it be complementary and very, I think, hopefully not over-indexed in any one area. It's not just about grades or scores or these one few things, but really as much about you, in a the word holistic is overused, but in a holistic sense as possible. But I think there is, to your point, I think there is some room for candidates to say, I think I know a little bit about what Yale's about, so I can kind of present these examples that maybe are a little bit more consistent. But I think you definitely want to be led by, I guess, the larger point, you want to be led by what the school is asking. Don't try to shoehorn in this anecdote or this point you want to get. If the school is asking for something else, or the school is looking for other information, you have to kind of meet the school where it is and what we're asking for and what we care about, because we all have largely overlapping applications in some ways, but they're all different in other ways.
Yale has a very distinctive application. This question is distinctive. The one essay question is distinctive. You do have the video essay, which some schools have, but most don't. Mm-hmm. You also have the situational judgment test. So you have a very distinctive application.
Yeah, and I think we've constructed it very intentionally to draw out different complementary aspects of a candidate's profile, so that we do have, as I said, a very balanced perspective. And so the idea is that, I guess the mistake is trying to kind of don't try to work against that too much, kind of understand what the schools are asking and go with it. It doesn't mean you can present your shade things in some ways that in ways that you feel would be helpful to you. Obviously that's what part of what an application is, but don't be an investment banker who says, Yale's at the nonprofit school, so I'm going to say my post MBA goals are in the nonprofit space. That's not going to help you. It's just going to look like you look, did the application look disjointed?
Yeah, we had this brings to mind, we've had many clients in this basically have tried this, but this one particular client sticks in my mind for a variety of reasons that I'm not going to go into now. But he was applying, he was a reapplicant when he came to us, and he ordered what we call a rejection review. Mm-hmm. So the consultant that gave him the rejection review actually at one time was at Yale SOM. Okay. And she told him that, as an admissions director, assistant admissions director, and she told him she wouldn't have admitted him either. Mm-hmm. And he said, "Why wouldn't you have admitted me?" She said, "Because your goals don't match what you had done in the past." He had a strong finance background. He suddenly wanted to be an entrepreneur. And he said, "Well, that's what my friends told me was the end goal this year. So I said I wanted to be an entrepreneur." Mm-hmm. says, well, what do you want to do? He says, I want to go back in finance. I want to be, I don't know, investment banking, PE, VC. I don't remember what the detail was. It was several years ago. But she says, well, why don't you write that? It'll make a lot more sense. It'll be authentic. You'll be able to write more easily about it. And that's what he did. He did get accepted. I don't remember at which school, but it was a top finance program. Yeah. And, but there was that whole thing of authenticity or hollowness, shallowness, conversely, and it made an enormous difference. Yeah, just made an enormous difference. Yeah, let's move on. I know you're gonna. Yeah, I'm looking at the clock, and you're gonna run out of time, and I don't want to impose too much more. Now, some applicants, but I think this was a really good conversation, and I really want to direct listeners, if you want to know, because Bruce in the last podcast that we did went really into detail into the rationality and the purposefulness of the different elements in the application. And when you talk about holistic, it's not just this fuzzy term. He really, really explored it. And that's at accepted.com/338. All right. Now going forward, some applicants have specific elements in their background that keeps them up at night. How do you view applicants who had a dip in grades? And there's two very different kinds of situations I'm going to ask you about. Okay. How do you view applicants who had a dip in grades or perhaps a period of unemployment due to depression or emotional illness?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the caveat I make for any comment is that, we look at every application individually based on the overall profile. So it's tough to talk about, pull out any one element and talk about in isolation because it really only derives meaning in the context of the overall application. But in those instances, if you had if there was sort of mental, the mental illness or some sort of emotional challenge that caused a period of unemployment or different grades, we will, you should put that in your, if you feel comfortable, put that in your optional essay. I think that's a place to explain it because it's not something we would see elsewhere. Unless you made that your essay itself, you could also might be something you talk about there. But we are looking for. We will see obviously the gap in employment. We will see if that's what it is. We will see the different grades if that's what it is. And we do look in the transcript. We don't just look at the overall GPA, but we go semester by semester and look at the courses and we'll look at the trends. And if there's a discrete period of low grades or unemployment, if there's a sort of abnormality. Or something that is atypical for your overall profile, we will notice it. And so if it's helpful to have that context, have that explanation. I don't know if the question is really asking whether it's okay to share that or whether, people are concerned about the stigma of sort of mental illness. But I think it's something that people, if it's whatever it is, if it's depression, if it's some other issue that someone's dealing with, that happens with people all the time, and there are sort of it can be if you're showing that it's sort of transient, then you've been able to kind of overcome it and tackle it. I think that's something that speaks to other values, and I think that's something that we, it helps to know the reason behind it. Again, if you feel comfortable sharing that, so that we can understand the context behind that sort of abnormality. And if it is in terms of your employment or your academic performance, and if it is transient, we have to obviously take that into context to understand that.
Okay. And what about an institutional action, let's say an academic infraction or maybe a misdemeanor? If somebody has that on their record, is that going to be an application killer?
Yeah, it's interesting you asked that question because that's something actually this year we've made changes on that front. We did this started last year and actually really more fully this year because that's an area where we are concerned that in the application review people have their own values, their own judgments they bring towards or a DUI or any number of other sort of infractions, academic or otherwise, and we found that. It's very inconsistent in terms of how your application readers approach it. And it's really not based on anything other than their own views on this. And we know that actually, so College Board, I think I believe College Board has moved to suppress this information from the Common App. They don't actually are moving towards not asking it, I don't believe. So actually that's what we've done, and we've done benchmarking with Yale College. We're closely with them and other schools here at Yale to see what their best practices are. And we actually suppress that information, any sort of academic infraction or criminal record. The readers don't see that, and that would only become an issue after a decision is made on the application, because we don't want that to influence the outcome of the application. So that's an area where I actually don't know if we don't advertise that. I don't know if that's a little bit too sort of insider baseball, or I shouldn't be sharing that, but I think we think that's a smarter way. We're trying, again, that's one aspect of, I talked about earlier about suppressing certain information. That's an area where we don't feel like that's relevant to the application decision. And it's only needlessly kind of influencing. I think it's unduly influencing, or can unduly influence. We try to make sure that it doesn't do that, but we worry that it could. So that's why we're trying to take it out of the review process and have it be a separate thing.
So where would it come in? I mean, would it only come in if, let's say, there's a background check, or is it something before the final decision that's brought in?
If there was, we would only, like, as probably a smaller committee would, this is a change this year, a smaller committee would review it before any sort of final decision.
Okay.
But we don't want to kind of inform the general review process. We found actually that what we understand in doing research is that even people seeing that, so we've changed the wording of the question. So applicants who have an academic infraction or criminal record actually are less likely to apply. They're less likely to follow through in the application process. And so that tends to be a deterrent to applying. And I think that was something that a reason behind the College Board. I believe that they're suppressing that information. I don't want to speak out of school.
Right.
I don't know if that's right, but I think that's where they're going. So I think that's part of the reason too, is we don't want to chill people from applying for something that wouldn't really influence their outcome anyway.
Okay. And what advice do you have for applicants either applying this cycle or thinking ahead to an application next cycle?
Oh geez, there's so much advice. I think I have to say, I think it's probably a couple of things I would say is I think this year is going to be probably last year was a very abnormal, atypical year in a lot of fronts, in a lot of regards. And I think there will be a return, knock on wood, more to normalcy this year in terms of the application pool and the application process. So I think it's actually, to the extent last year and the year before were so kind of atypical, I think this would be hopefully a better year to apply in terms of those seeking normalcy. And I think hopefully, again, knock on wood, that the academic experience will be even more back to normal next year. So I think the message from that is, I think this is probably a good year to apply, and next year hopefully will be as well, for people thinking about getting an MBA. And I think the other thing is, harkening back to an earlier comment, we don't have, for example, people can't visit campus now. We don't have campus visitors. We're not doing on-campus interviews. But we've built out all sorts of tools for people to be able to engage with us virtually, both the admissions office. These are things we've done even previously in terms of application guide and other tools. We have coming out with a virtual tour. There are ways to connect with students. And I think these are all great ways to learn more about the program. And I think I would encourage people to take advantage of them, because it is it's an opportunity, especially for people who, campus visits are great, but I always caution people not to put too much stock in them, in the sense, and certainly that we don't put too much stock in them, because only a certain subset of people can actually come to campus. They're close enough, they can afford to, and we don't want to disadvantage people who live far away and they can't make it to campus, and we don't want to. So there's no that has no influence in the evaluation process. But I'm hoping that because no one can visit campus, that's even more of a level setter and equalizer in terms of people's access to information and learning about the program, and actually expanding the scope of what people can experience here at Yale, even if it's not in person. So I'd say take advantage of those resources.
Absolutely. And just in preparing for the call, we had some great resources on all the elements of the application, on online videos, written text. It was really impressive. Anything you would have liked me to ask you? Running or?
I don't know. I think we covered a good bit. I know I think nothing that comes to mind. I think we covered a good bit of ground, and it's always great to talk to you, and I really appreciate the opportunity, and certainly look forward to, sharing more information at other times as well.
Great. Well, we'll definitely have you back. I want to thank you, Bruce, very much for joining me today. Where can listeners and potential applicants learn more about Yale SOM's MBA program?
Well, I would say som.yale.edu is our website address, and I think that's probably the best starting point. Also, if you have specific questions, you can always email us at mba.admissions@yale.edu. That's our direct email address. But also just som.yale.edu has all the information about the application process, upcoming events, student profiles, information about the curriculum. So that's really the place to go.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. We're going to include links in the show notes at accepted.com/442 to the Yale SOM site, as well as Bruce's last interview, which I've been kind of plugging throughout this one, as well as to related articles and interviews. And they're all linked to at accepted.com/442. Quick reminder, don't miss the MBA admissions quiz. Find out if you're really ready to apply and competitive at your target schools. Take the quiz at accepted.com/MBA quiz today. Listener, thank you too for joining Bruce, DelMonico, and me for our 442nd episode. If you find the show worthwhile, please subscribe. Make sure you don't miss any future shows, be they with admissions directors, professors, current students, test prep pros, or alumni doing great things. Thanks again for coming. This is Admission Straight Talk, produced by Accepted, and I'm your host, Linda Abraham. I'll talk to you again next week.